Let's look at two more examples of hypothesis tests for proportions. In my last video, we looked at examples 1 and 2, so that's why I'm starting with example 3, along the same theme. The first thing we do, 75% of Americans say they eat healthy, is translate that sentence into either the null or the alternative. Does this sound like it includes the equal sign? 75% say they eat healthy. I think it does. In fact, we'd use the P for proportion equals 0.75. That's exactly what that is saying. Why did I put it at the null? Because the null always gets the equal sign. So what's the complement of being equal? Is not equal. In our first two examples in the last video, the alternative was just greater than both times. So this is something a little bit different. So we're going to learn how to turn this into a final conclusion. But what happens after this is we ask, what is the data? What is the evidence that would support my alternative? So let's say a sample of 1,200 Americans were surveyed, and let's say 860 of them said they eat healthy. Let's also, one thing I'll try to be better at is let's also state my alpha level from the beginning. I don't need it till the end, but it's nice to say we're going to perform a hypothesis test where my significance level is 1%. In my first two examples, it was 5%, which is typical, but let's just try something different this time. So, a survey was done, 1,200 people, 860 say they eat healthy. What do I need to do is convert that into a point estimate, a sample proportion. So let's take 860, divide by 1,200. Got my trusty calculator. And it looks like 0.71 and then 666 forever. So I'll just go to the fourth decimal place. So let's ask ourselves, I put a box around important numbers. This is my point estimate. My question to you right now is, does my evidence support my alternative right now? And it does. My alternative saying is the true proportion of all Americans is not 75%. That's not 75%. So we're ready to move. All right, here comes the normal curve. Two number lines. Top number line, write the word proportion. Second number line, the letter Z. How do I build the rest? What always goes down the middle is the null, 75. My evidence then falls where it makes sense. 7167 is less than that. 7167. I know my z-score right below the null would always be 0, and we'll use my calculator in a moment to finish out the rest of this. But what I do know right now for the first time, this time my evidence is to the left, and so that gives me a left tail. Now, the one thing that happens whenever you have an alternative that uses the not equal sign, I'm going to circle this because this is why we know we're going to do next. Whenever we have this, this is the beginning of a two-tailed test, which means whatever I just shaded to the left is going to give me the same tail over here. And the reason for that is I didn't know what my alternative was going to be. We just said not 75. Well, it could have been less than 75. It could have been more than 75. And so my hypothesis test has to account for that. So whatever area you did over here, we have the exact same tail to the right. And there's your two tails. Now, one thing we could do is ask, well, where is that spot on this top number line? So ask yourself, how many percents away is 75 away from 7167? So if I were to take 75% and subtract that 71, it's about 3.333 forever. So what I could do is take 75, add the 3%, and that would give me 0.7833. Notice this number came out of thin air. It wasn't part of the original data, but it's like as if we got a percentage as low as this. We have the high end on the same side, the same distance away. So again, all I did was ask how far away is 75 away from 7167, found that difference, and then I added that to 75 to get this number. All right, well, it's time to head to our machine. Calculator. Here we go. So the move, stat, over to tests, number 5 for one prop Z test, and we enter the data. My null was 75%, so 0.75. Don't forget the decimal. In this problem, there was 860 people who said they eat healthy out of 1,200 total. And here is the alternative, my not equal sign. So hit enter to choose that, and finally calculate. So you'll notice some familiar numbers. My alternative sitting at the top, not equal to 75. My sample size, 1,200. My p-hat, my point estimate, something we've already calculated. The two new numbers are my z-score and my p-value. So let me just jot those off to the side. My z-score, negative 2.67. 2 decimal places is plenty. My p-value, 0.007. And I'm going to go ahead and round that to 7. Calculator's done. Let's go back to my sketch and complete my Z number line. So I know that negative 2.67 makes sense. It's to the left. And it turns out, had it been this upper one, it would have been the positive 2.67. But what really helps me make a conclusion is my p-value. So here's the decision we're going to make. At the beginning of this problem, we said the alpha level was 1%, and so my decision is this. Since my p-value, 0.007, is less than my alpha level, my decision is to reject the null. My conclusion, then, we have strong evidence the percent of Americans who eat healthy is not 75%. We've rejected the null. All right. If my battery lasts, let's get through one more example. Start with null and alternative. At least 40% of apartment dwellers will miss paying rent on May 1st. Well, let's take this phrase, at least 40%. Does that phrase include the equal sign? When I hear the phrase at least 40, what that means is 40 or more. So yes, it includes 40. So that actually belongs in my null. 40 or more is p greater than or equal to 0.40. What's the complement of this is p just less than 0.40. Now in your online homework, I like this. I just want to remind you that it's also okay, even though it says at least 40, to get away with just saying p just equals 40. And my alternative is still less than 40. So here comes my data. What happened? A survey of 240 people. Of them, 90 will say they're going to miss their May 1st rent payment. Oh, back over here. Let's say my alpha level's back to 5%. Okay, let's turn this data into a point estimate. What's my p hat? 90 out of 240. And it looks like we get this. My question, is that less than 40? Yes, it is. This should always support my alternative. So here comes my sketch. 2 number lines. My proportions. My z. My null. And my evidence, 37, is again to the left. So this is a left-tailed test, and that's all there is this time. There is no also right tail because my alternative was just less than. So let's head to our calculator and get the final 2 numbers we need. Stat test 5, my null 0.4, 90 out of 240. Again, this time my alternative is less than, so hit enter before we calculate, and here we go. My z-score, negative 0.79, my p-value, 0.2146. Putting it all together, here's my finished sketch, negative 0.79. What's my decision? Since my p-value of 0.2146 is greater than 0.5, that means we have a large area, we have a large p-value. That tells me to fail to reject the null. My conclusion, even though there was some evidence that it was less than 40, turns out it was weak. We have weak or insufficient evidence to support the alternative. That means it could be true. The percent is at least 40, which is just restating the null hypothesis.